Oh no, not your Summoner's War. What's up? That's okay. Nope, do it. Dope. I didn't leave, Ashley. You left. No need to be worried. I've heard of like the 15-minute rule, but you guys are ready to bail on me before 4 p.m. Dang. But that's okay. I get it. I'm the same way. Did did anybody have success getting the third multiplication in there? I appreciate that honesty. Did some things. Oh no. Well, hopefully we can figure out that that bit of it today. You mean it looks like this? I'm gonna assume that's what you mean. Then it just means that in your shader forge, you need to change your blending option over to additive. Give that nice translucency. And in fact, let me do this. And go ahead and throw a copy of the shader to anybody who wants it. Oops. So if you just drag and drop that into your project view down here like you would a texture file or a 3D model file or anything like that, it will work. Give me some of these extra assets here. Hang on, I'm in the middle of screwing up right here. You want, stop it, go away. You want additive. This guy. Yeah. I think like Skype like automatically downloads them. Like, can you right click on the file and then like click like show in folder or something? Something like that. Also, using the Skype desktop app is like way more legit than using like that Windows 10 Skype thing. Ooh, yeah. No problem. Alright, so today we're going to do a little bit more tornado stuff. Nah, no viruses. You good. I'm not good enough to write viruses. Viruses are written by crazy people who are usually crazy good. Okay, so couple of things. First, I'll go ahead and for those of you guys who didn't do the challenge, I'll go ahead and demonstrate how the challenge is done now. So the trick of the challenge is to just kind of identify which parts of all this like stuff need to be duplicated and then multiplied in again. So your project will, one of the things you have to sort of get used to is that these node networks start to look really ugly. And if you're familiar with like Substance Designer and a lot of these node-based systems, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like these things usually like visually start to get really out of control. So I find that in the end, it's not so much a matter of are you good at writing shaders in ShaderForge? It's are you good at keeping your node networks clean and then actually being able to read them, which is not simple to do. So here I'm just kind of like moving some stuff around to try to keep this all nice and as legible as I can. So this right here is like the original noise texture where everything is kind of originating, and then all of this stuff right here sort of represents all the process that we do to kind of modify that texture. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that, which is going to make this instantly much more difficult to read. Move all this down here. I actually didn't want to grab this copy. Don't worry, I'm going to share this my finished shader with you in the end of this, so if you get lost or don't want to follow along, that's cool too. Oh no, those IT problems. Okay, so I've got this texture, and so the texture needs to be fed in from our original noise, so like this. And then our UVs are being edited through like this simple panner. So what we have going on like here is this is just us kind of like scaling out like this whole, we're scaling out our UVs and then we're loading them into this panner, and our panner is being driven by this little mathy formula thing here where we're basically taking in some sort of time value and some sort of speed value. We'll need to change some of these names because this is now sample 3 scale, and this one has become sample 3 speed. So nothing has changed, this is all identical. Then the next thing that you have to do is actually do something with the output after you've made all these modifications to that texture. So this is the part where we have to go and find where to appropriately handle our multiplication. I think it's going to be like right in here, because we currently have this node right here, which is acting as that sort of gradient mask, which is making it kind of go from strong to weak like that. So I'm going to want to multiply it in right about here. So I'm going to create another multiply node, and we're going to be multiplying this times this, and then we're going to be multiplying this by that value of 2. Like this. So we'll drop another multiplication node like so, and then we'll be feeding this value in to here. Now we should have the 3 samples. and this looks crazy out of control. In this class, we'll rarely ever make anything that looks this complicated. Most of this assignment was just to test whether or not you have the patience and the attention span and concept of how multiplication works in shaders. So let me take a look and just make sure that this modification actually works. We should have our 3 scales. So here I have like this third sample. Go ahead and hit play here. So here I can take that third sample and I can scale it, and I can also adjust its speed as well. Cool, so let me go ahead and toss that updated one over to you guys. How do you copy the nodes? The way that you copy the nodes is by holding down Alt and then dragging around to create this marquee, and then Control-C, Control-V to copy-paste, just like you normally would. No worries. Okay, moving over that new shader for those of you guys who want it. Just move my windows around a little bit so that I can see a little bit better. Okay. All right, so is that third sampling important? It's not crazy important. You don't actually need it, but what it allows for you to do is just create more variation in what you're seeing. So it creates sort of that parallax layered effect. It turns out last class I was being really stupid because I was trying to figure out what this seam was that was right here, and that was just actually me being dumb. There's no problem with the UV unwrap job that we put together. There is a problem, however, with the scales that I was kind of fiddling with. And so the reason why we see this seam here is because the scales that I'm using for the textures, I expose these right here. And so unless these are whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, or something like that, you're going to end up seeing seams because even though it's a tileable texture, it's not infinitely tileable at any given spot. It's tileable on whole numbers. So if it's a 1 by 1, a 2 by 2, or a 3 by 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my sample 1 scale is 1. I'm going to set my sample 2 scale to 2, and my sample 3 scale to 3. And then I'll leave it to you to modify the speeds, but there's nothing wrong with the way that we have anything set up. Yes, these are all in the material settings, right? Exactly. Either way works. Yeah, if you want to create a completely separate material, that works. Screenshot of the shader. You sure can, Ashley. It wasn't good enough for me to send you the shader, huh? Just messing with you. Let's see here. Boom. Ew. Yeah, that glow shader we wrote was way simpler than this. Way simpler. This is actually going to be a really important shader though. So if you haven't taken the time to get good at this and to see how this whole thing works, I would definitely encourage you guys to to do it, because it is an important shader. We'll be using it quite a bit because it's super versatile. I use it all the time, especially for things like smoke, energy stuff. It's really good. All right, I'll give you guys a little bit of time to get your projects in working order and to ask any questions that you might have. If your shader's just white, what could cause that? It might be because of this, maybe. So if you don't have any textures loaded in, like this, if you look over in the inspector, you'll see that there's your noise texture that's probably not populated. So you want to drag and drop that there. And then you're probably missing this gradient map that we were using to just kind of block off the bottom. So drag and drop that guy over there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you want to make sure that all your scales are whole numbers. Really, Evelyn? No problem. Can you screen share so I can take a look? Oh, your shader over in Shader Forge. Okay, yeah. So what you want to do is, do you see where there's that noise texture, like almost in the middle? Left. There, yeah. Click on Select. There's a little button right there that says Select. Like, see where it says like default white? Yeah, go and click on Select, and that'll allow you to assign a texture to it. So now you can just go find your noise texture. I don't know what it's called. Or what you could do is you can just go into your project view and drag and drop it, either way. That's the material, not the texture. There it is, Twist UV. There we go. Ba-bam. Kim, I can take a look at your scene if you do screen share. All right. So go ahead and scroll. First, can you show me the scene? I think I see it, but whoa. You're go ahead and scale that guy up. He's like super small, so that's why like whenever you move around, it like moves all crazy. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so scroll down in your inspector. Yeah, so you're not using whole numbers for. You also didn't name. You didn't name these nodes, so it's hard to tell what they are. But maybe we can kind of guess. Like, so node 3071, change that to 1. And then actually change all these values to 1. And then for your tiling and your offset, change tiling to 1. And there we go. And then offset doesn't really matter. Okay, so now we need to like, spice this up a little bit. So go ahead and change that 3071 node. Change that to like 2. What I think you should probably do is go into your shader and then name these name the sliders. That way you'll know what these do. But you want to make sure that your scale, the scale ones are whole numbers. That's the key to making it seamless. Cool. Anyone else? Christina, wanna cheers? Ah, I see. All right, got all sorts of hurricanes going on in here. Okay, cool. All right, so what's going on with the seamage? Okay, I see him. Got it. Yeah, see that sample 3 scale? Change that to 1 as well. The sample 3 scale. It's like a down 1. There you go. That should clear it up. Yeah, doesn't look like there's seams on it anymore. No, the numbers that you put inside a shader forge, they're kind of like the default values, but then you can change them to whatever you want once they're in the inspector. Where? I'm trying to see it. Oh, okay. Let's see. No, that looks like it might be a UV thing. Possibly. Because it looks like it goes... Yeah, my guess is that it's a UV thing. But you know what could make us find out real quick is I could toss you this FBX file right here. And then we could find out like super quick, because if your UVs don't go like wall to wall, or if they go a little bit over, that's a possibility. It is also possible that the twist is really strong, and so what we're looking at is just some kind of UV distortion because of the twist. All those are possibilities, but I don't think it's involving your shader at this point. Cool. But your twists look like super dope. Like how you have them like all like strong like that looks super good. Mine's like way more subdued. All right, let me go ahead and screen share again. Okay, great. So we're going to make another really simple shader modification. Don't worry, it's not going to be that bad. Go ahead and select your shader and open it up in Shader Forge. Yeah, whichever one you're currently using. So if it's the one I sent you, then that one. We're going to add two very small modifications. The first modification we're going to make is we're going to set this up so that it doesn't backface cull. So currently, this looks really weird because, it culls all the back faces, and so we want it to actually be double-sided. And the way that we can set this up for being double-sided is with the shader open. If you go ahead and click on Geometry. Currently it's set for face culling, back face culling. If you go ahead and just click that drop down and select double-sided, now you should see that you get a much better twisting motion because now you're kind of seeing the leftward movement in the front, the rightward movement in the back, and it doesn't just randomly cull at the end for no particular reason. Sure. There we go. No problem. I mean, it doesn't matter if you don't have it, it's just not going to look as good. The feathering at the bottom is just introduced by having this map right here, this gradient that goes linearly from white to black from top to bottom, which I'm actually going to be changing right now. Okay, so speaking of changing that, I'm going to go ahead and open up that same gradient in Photoshop. And I'm basically just going to lay another gradient on top of it that's just going to go the other way. I just swore I did this just the other day. No, gotta hack my password. No. I know this is my password now. Crap. All right. So, where did you go? There we go. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and just create another layer on top of this. And for this, we're just going to do a black to transparent gradient. So nothing too fancy. Still going to be a linear style gradient. Except we're just going to be using a single color. So instead of black to white, we're just going to go black to transparent. And the reason for this is I want to create that feathering effect up at the top as well. It doesn't need to fall off as smoothly. It can be a little bit more abrupt. So maybe something like that. You can see that also by doing it this way that I've dramatically reduced how bright it's going to be right here in the center. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's bad, maybe I need to adjust the levels of this. But who knows, right? We'll just try it out and we'll see if it suits us. Trying this out is really simple because all you have to do is just save your Photoshop file. And since it's already linked inside of Unity, when you go and click back inside of Unity, you should see the change happen or propagate right away. You can see that all of these modifications that we are making are causing some pretty dramatic differences. And so it, like, just that one change that I added right now made this go from looking kind of terrible to instantly looking kind of great. And we're not done just yet, but kind of my whole methodology of building effects is you kind of just have to trust that it's gonna look bad until it stops looking bad, and you just kind of have to keep going and trust that the progress that you're making is indeed real progress. But it's hard. Sometimes it's easy to lose faith in the process and just kind of feel like things aren't going your way. Awesome, you guys. So if it didn't auto update, then that means that your image that you're using isn't linked in Photoshop, which is okay. That just means that you'll have to save out your Photoshop file. This dude. You'll just need to file, save as, pop this dude on the desktop or wherever, drag and drop it into your scene just like normal, and then go and replace that image inside of your material. The reason why it did that is possibly because you moved from one computer to another, or some of the metadata that was associated with linking that file to Photoshop just got like junked, something like that. And so if you're working at the same computer, like, then you have the benefit of not having to go through that and all that. But yeah, if you're jumping around and stuff, you might have to go and relink. Plug in the file and the material. This thing, right? There's your material only supports two textures: the noise texture and then the mask texture. Find your material right here. All right, Christina, screen share, and then Kim. All right, let's go ahead and put Shader Forge away. We don't need it. Then go ahead and drag in your gradient. Okay, so no. Select your the material that you're using, or that we're caring about right now. Yeah, and then do you see that empty texture slot? Goes there. Yeah, so your gradient might not actually be perfectly black at the top and perfectly black at the bottom. And so only if your gradient is 100% black at the top and the bottom will it actually eventually, completely go away. I can, for instance, I can toss you my gradient file, or you can go and make modifications to yours. But yeah, it's important that it goes all the way black up at the top. Dope. And then Kim. It sounds like you're putting it in the wrong slot. You don't have a second texture. Show me your shader. Yeah, the thing in we've been working on in Shader Forge. Okay, so this is incomplete. Do you have a more up-to-date one? You certainly do, because I've uploaded like 2 of them. So if you scroll up and go ahead and download, for instance, the latest shader, or for giggles, I'll go ahead and drag and drop my latest in as well, just to make sure. So you're going to want to replace the shader in your project with that one. Right click on it, and then show in folder. You want to drag that into the project view down at the bottom of the Unity window, yeah. So now in your material editor, so click on the material again. And now where it says Shader Forge Swirl up at the top, change that over to the one I just sent you, which will be under Shader Forge. Vortex, I think. Now drag the noise into the noise texture slot. And then in the other slot, that's where you're going to want to drag in your, sure. Cool. You got it. All right, let me go ahead and share screens again. All right, so in some cases, this might be good enough, but we're gonna keep going because why not? So the next step is we're going to add the ability for us to change the color of this directly inside of the material itself. You'll notice that in our material editor, we have no ability to change any color, so it's just always going to be this sort of white. We can actually do that very simply, and if you remember how we constructed the glow shader, it's the exact same process. All we have to do is just right before we get to the very end here, right? 1 second. Sorry, had to sneeze. So just before we get into this last section, like where we go from this final multiplication into our emission slot, we're going to want to insert something in the middle here. So we're going to want to create a color node. So hold down C, drop a color node, which I'll change to the name color. And then all we have to do is simply throw down a multiply node and multiply in this color times all of this extra stuff, like all this crazy Perlin noise, tiling, multiplication, panning stuff. Just multiply that in so that no matter what, in that final pass, we're going to be just tinting it a certain color, and then we'll feed that into the emission like this. So the only things that changed are these 2 nodes. And so if we go into our project now, you should see that there's this color with a color picker. And now we can go ahead and tint this to be all sorts of different colors. We can also adjust the opacity of it as well. So if we wanted to create some sort of like a snowstorm sort of an effect, I can tint it this, kind of a blue color. The color picker box shows up if you click on the color swatch, kind of like in Photoshop. And if yours isn't changing color, Evelyn, can you show me? So the opacity changes, but not the color, huh? That's a little weird. Inside of there, click on the gray area where it says color. Yeah, just click there, and then just go to that color picker, and then kind of move around. So that's not working either. That is a little bit weird. Do me a favor. Let me toss you mine, and let me know if it does the same thing on yours, so we can kind of isolate what the heck is going on. So here's mine. Give that a shot and let me know if that's still an issue. That'll help to isolate if it is a shader problem or something else. So you want to drag and drop the shader into your project, and then when it's there, go ahead and select the material that you're using, and then change the shader for it. So you might want to click on where it says Shader Forge Vortex, and then go down to where it says Shader Forge, and then select the shader I sent you, which is called Vortex. Dope! Can you screen share again? I think it's the top one. Hang on one second though. Select your material for me. Alright, so it's called Noise, which uses Vortex with a capital V. Alright, let me make a change real quick. So it's probably because there's duplication of names. So here's another shader that's especially for you. So drag and drop that guy in. I think it's the brand new one, the Vortex 2. Alright, now so now if you go and try to change your shader, it should be the one called none of those. Okay, so for the sake of clarity, delete all of the vortex shaders. It's okay, don't panic. It's weird. I don't know what was up with the other shader, but you got color. Life is good. Cool. My pleasure. All right, let's go ahead and take a break from shaders for a bit and move on to something else that's going to be related. We're going to kind of tie all these things together. But this cylindrical thing can just kind of go off to the side for a bit. We don't need it. We're going to work on something else. So I find that something that I'm constantly trying to do is hide things that don't look good. Because basically when we're constructing effects, it's all about being convincing, right? It's about putting the detail where it matters, and I like to only add detail if I need to. And usually, I only need to add detail if I'm trying to be informative of something. I'm trying to let the player know, hey, this causes damage, hey, this is healing you, some sort of feedback that they should care about. And then anything that I fail to accomplish with that, I try to, that's when I try to add in extra stuff. Now, what I'm failing to accomplish here is I'm failing to establish a silhouette that is much, much softer and isn't so representative of a cylinder. So as you can see, like this whole, like it's very obvious this is a cylinder, and so the next steps I'm going to be taking are going to be to soften that up and prevent it from looking as much like a cylinder as it does. Currently, if I were to go and add in like a ground object, right? So if I were to just create a plane for this guy to sit upon, which looks kind of weird just because of the way that I have like my lighting set up. So you guys don't have to follow this step. I'm just doing this like as just a demonstration. So I'm just going to create a material. Where are you, material? There you are. Drag and drop that material onto this plane. And then edit some of its parameters. So let me just take and make it a much darker color. It's also super weird that this that this cylinder is casting this shadow, so I should probably go and disable that. It's easy to do. I'm just going to go right here in the inspector and turn the cast shadows off. But right now the ability, or this tornado, it looks like it's just kind of floating in the air. It doesn't look like it connects with the ground or anything like that. And so it doesn't feel like it's rooted in the environment. So we're going to be introducing some smoke to make it look like it is at least planted on the ground or connected on the ground, create some sort of secondary motion in order to better cast the illusion. And so we're going to facilitate this with a new, what some of you guys might consider a much simpler topic. I think everybody considers this a simpler topic than shaders. But the things that we're planning on doing with this is dependent upon shaders. So let's take a look at particles. In your scenes, go ahead and click on Game Object. Click on hover over Effects, and then click on Particle System. I'm going to move the twister out of the way, move this ground object out of the way, and here's my particle system. Move it so we can see it maybe a little bit better. Or a little bit worse. There we go. So this is my particle system, and it doesn't look great. The first day of class, I showed you guys some really good-looking particle systems. Don't worry, Kim. It actually didn't delete a whole lot, because all of your shaders are saved, all of that stuff. So there should be very little work that you actually have to do to get it back. All right, so this is a particle system. Now, a particle system is basically an object that emits these tiny little cards up into the air, in this case. And each one of these tiny little cards is nothing more than a two-dimensional image. So here I just went into this wireframe mode, and you can see that it's basically just pushing up all these quads up into the air. And if I rotate around that particle system, you'll see that no matter where I'm pointing, these cards are always facing me. That's because they are what we would call billboarded. So they're two-dimensional images, but the system is set up so that they are always drawn facing the camera. Now, particle systems are really great for us building things that don't look like they have a whole lot of shape or form. And particle systems are a wonderful way for us to get a lot of objects on the screen without incurring a lot of cost. Particle systems are cheap when it comes to some things, and they're expensive when it comes to others. And we'll talk more about that later on. They're just another one of the tools that we have with us. So I'm going to change this from wireframe back over to shaded. Now, by default, all of these these default particles look really bad, but we'll be improving upon that in just a little bit. Now, you guys could spend the rest of this course learning about all the cool things that you can do with particle systems. They're probably going to be the most fun part of this class. If you thought that you were going to be doomed to write shaders for the rest of the course, and shaders haven't been your thing, don't worry. Shaders are actually only just a part of this class that we use to kind of push all of our other stuff to the next level and pull off nice visuals. Sorry, Pomeranians. So this particle system, you'll get used to kind of seeing just these white puff balls being launched up into the air, because this is what a default particle system looks like, and it takes a pretty substantial amount of effort in order to make particle systems stop looking bad, and kind of like everything else, they look bad until they look good. I'm going to do the best I can to walk you through a lot of the features that particle systems have to offer. I'm mostly going to be focusing on the ones that I use day in and day out. A lot of these features I never use, and some of them I actually don't know what they do, just because they're kind of a little bit more obscure. And some of them I just plain avoid using because they're really, really expensive, and the kinds of games that I work on just can't support it, or it's just not something I want to do. I want to solve those problems in a different way. All right, so when you create a particle system and you look over in the inspector, you'll have all sorts of options, more options than you want. In fact, I think the particle system component has more options to it than any other component inside of Unity. And if you're looking at it saying this doesn't look so bad, each one of these light gray sections is collapsible. So yeah, you can do all sorts of stuff. You can basically limit how much information you want at any given time. Now, by default, the only things that are being taken advantage of at the start is the particle system, the base. This is where all of your base settings are going to be. Emission, which is responsible for how often and at what rate these particles are emitted, and then the shape, which describes the shape. So let's fiddle around with some of these settings. By the time we're done today, we'll have a particle system that looks pretty good, but is also still going to be a little bit basic. So diving right in, and sort of in no particular order, usually one of the first things that I do is I don't actually touch anything up here at the top where it says particle system. The thing I usually jump right into, you're going to want to click on Game Object, Game Object, Effects, Particle System. So the first thing I usually jump into is shape. Usually the shape or shape language is the thing that I care about the most. And so it's no question that whenever I'm putting together a particle system, I want to get the shape right first, above all else. So cone is nice, especially if you, of course, want to emit things in that sort of a pattern. This can be nice for trying to create flames or trying to create, I don't know, like a jet stream or something like that. But for now, I'm going to just click where it says cone, and we'll be exploring some of these others. Sphere allows you to kind of shoot things out in all different directions from a focal point. Hemisphere lets you do the same, except it doesn't shoot all of these, it doesn't shoot everything out in all directions. It actually only shoots things out in a half circle. If I double click on the particle system and then kind of like zoom in to get closer to it, you'll see what I'm talking about here. So here you can see that it's actually this half circle. You see that it's not actually spitting out any particles that go down here like below the world. And there's a donut. This looks kind of dumb right now, just because of all the other settings that we have set up. But as you can see, you're able to emit particles in the shape of a donut. Mesh is interesting. Not right now it isn't, because we haven't provided a mesh. But I'll show you some opportunities later on where you can utilize a mesh as an emission shape. So I do that quite a bit. There's mesh renderer and skinned mesh renderer, and these give you the opportunity, skinned mesh renderer in particular, if you have a rigged animated character running around, you can actually use them as a shape, which is kind of interesting because they're constantly, moving typically. And so the shape is one that is constantly changing and deforming. And so as that shape is moving, the particle systems the particle system that's associated with it is going to be following that geometry. So if you want to create kind of like a wispy ghost sort of an effect, skinned mesh render is usually the way to go with this. And then we have circle, which is going to emit in a circular pattern. Nice for auras, novas, and things of that sort. Now, circle is actually the pattern that I think I'm going to be using for this, but I don't know yet. I just kind of feel like it's going to most closely match what I'm going for. And what I'm trying to do, again, is I'm trying to introduce this particle system that's going to make the ground feel more connected with my twister, my tornado thing. Now with this shape, each shape has a set of different parameters. With this, I can adjust the radius by just clicking and kind of dragging to slide it around. So if I wanted everything kind of to always be created at the central point, I could just make the radius super tiny. And if I made the radius larger, what it's currently going to do is it's going to be emitting all of these particles at a random point somewhere inside of this volume. If I adjust the arc parameter, I can basically turn this into almost like Pac-Man, where I can choose if I wanted to, for instance, only shoot particles in a degree range. I can do that. So now I'm spitting these out in like a 40-degree range. But I want all this smoke to kind of be emitted in all directions. It's currently set to random, but I'll show you kind of what this does in a little bit. So the spread allows for you to kind of like determine how far apart, or like how, I guess, like the angular like spread of these, like how you want them to sort of like be emitted. But I never really end up using it because I usually rely on the shape to do more of that work for me. Oftentimes what I will do is I will take and I'll modify this parameter though, which is the radius thickness. And so oftentimes I find that what I don't want is I don't want for the particles to be emitted in from the from anywhere in this volume. What I typically find that I want is for them to be emitted from like the outside. This is usually for like novas and things of that sort. And so now you can see they're always kind of like being emitted from the edge of this space. That's usually what I want. That may be the case for what I want here as well, so I'll leave that. Now, going back to mode, if you were to set this for something like ping pong, this is like, I don't know, it's kind of like bullet hell. I don't know, at least that's what it reminds me of. You can see that what it's doing is it's kind of emitting particles in a circle, and then it's going back around. And so this can kind of create some nice, interesting patterns for you. Especially if I start cranking out more of these particles. So usually I just fiddle around with these shape options until I get something that I'm more or less happy with. And then what I do is I jump back up to particle system and emission, and I don't mess with all these settings, at least not at first. What I try to do is I try to get a feel for how many particles I'm going to need to pull off this kind of an effect. So let's take a look at emission. I'm currently emitting 10 particles a second. That seems kind of low. Let's crank that up to 100. And now hopefully instantly you're getting an idea for all the sorts of interesting things that you can do with this sort of a system. I know at first you're probably saying, this is kind of boring, kind of sucks. I thought I was going to be able to do way more cool stuff, but James is showing me this shape thing, and honestly it's kind of boring me. The mode is inside of shape, and I currently have mine set to ping pong. Do you see shape? Inside of the particle system? Do you have the particle system selected? And then do you see in the inspector where it says shape? It's below the emission section. See, those are hard. The black hole where you want all your particles to kind of look like they're getting sucked into a focal point. We will do something like it, but it is not as simple. I mean, I guess it kind of is. For example, if you were to go up here at the very top, you see where it says starting speed. Change that to like a negative number, and you'll see that it'll start to suck inwards. Actually, that we just kind of created the Ubisoft logo. But yeah, now all those they're all kind of going. Now I know I was just like, this isn't very easy, and it looks like it's easy, but like getting this to be good is challenging. All right, so Evelyn, you found shape. Did you change it to circle and switch it over to like ping pong and do all that stuff? Did you change the shape to circle? And there's no mode underneath arc. What version of Unity are you running? it doesn't matter that much. We're not actually going to be doing ping pong stuff. Like, I was just trying to impress you guys a little bit. So, so don't feel like you're okay. That's a really old version by now. So yeah, a lot of these like new particle like stuff that I'm showing right now are actually part of like the new Because like now we're no longer in Unity version 5. We're like in Unity version 2017. They actually just gave up with like the old numbering system. So so yeah, not a big deal though. You can just download and upgrade your project. But yeah, don't worry about it. This is just like to kind of like show how an effect can go from looking really lame to looking really cool really fast. And it also, in my opinion, really demonstrates the power of this system. So shapes are obviously an important thing. I'm gonna go ahead and disable ping pong, just because even though it looks cool, it's actually something that you will rarely use. So now that I have a particle system more or less like in place, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna kind of move it over to a place where it's nice and visible in my scene, like there. And then I'm going to move my tornado dude over into the center. And turns out tornado dude is like super tiny. So don't worry about like scale and all that stuff. Like, we're just having fun with this. We currently have no concept of scale, and that's okay. So more or less get this dude in the middle, scale it up, just so we have some idea of what we're trying to do. Yep, that looks terrible, but it's gonna look terrible for a long time, so we need to just get used to it. All right. Yep, looks awful. Cool. So the next thing that we're going to do is, currently these particles are living for way too long, which sounds really terrible, but they are. Like, they just go way too far. And the reason for this is that in the particle system settings, up at the almost very top, oh, by the way, don't look at duration. Like, just avoid thinking about duration for now. Duration doesn't matter because our particle systems that we're creating in the beginning of this course loop. And so if you created a particle system that wasn't supposed to loop, like a muzzle flash or an explosion, those don't loop, and so duration matters. But a particle system that is like constantly shooting energy and things like that, they loop. And so having duration doesn't matter. The reason why I say this is because I always confuse myself. I always think duration, okay, let me make that a smaller number so I can reduce the duration. Forgetting that the thing I actually want is this thing, starting lifetime. Starting lifetime. This means that these particles, each individual particle is living for 5 seconds before it goes away. And that's too long. So I'm going to change this to maybe 1. These particles are also currently kind of small. See where it says start size, where this is set to 1? I'm going to go ahead and change that to something bigger, like maybe 5. Yeah, kind of. Now, usually my workflow is I kind of like to sit back from my monitor. I kind of let my eyes glaze over, and then I kind of like try to think about the thing that bothers me the most, and then work on that. And so the thing that's bothering me the most is all this popping that's happening. Like, you see like how these particles, I don't know, they look like they're popcorn almost, like how they just kind of pop into existence, and then they kind of pop out of existence. That's like kind of driving me crazy right now. So that's the thing that we're going to work on now. So I can fix that by going down and enabling, just kind of, get used to scrolling up and down in the inspector, because there's just a lot of particle system stuff to dig through. And don't worry, it's going to take us a while to get good with this particle system stuff. So don't feel like you got to be a pro today. It's going to take us weeks and weeks to figure out all this stuff. So let's go into the color over lifetime. Be sure to check it to enable it, otherwise it's not going to use it. And then this gives us a gradient editor. Go ahead and click that like white long bar like this to open up the gradient editor. Alright, so you're probably familiar with this, but I'll go over it just in case. So these little dudes right here, they essentially act as markers, and those markers give us the ability to provide specific locations where we want some sort of value change, whether it be color or alpha. We can move those sliders around, similar to like you might do in like a levels editor or something like that. And that's kind of all there is to it. These dudes up here at the top, they control alpha, and these dudes here at the bottom, they control color. So I'm not going to touch color just yet. What I want to do is go ahead and click on this one right here up in the upper left-hand corner. I forget what these are called. I'm just calling them dudes. I remember hearing what they're called and being like, oh, dope, I want to remember that, and I don't remember. So this dude. If you guys know what they're called, like feel free to like enter it into Skype so I can stop sounding dumb. But for now, they're dudes. So I'm gonna take that dude and I'm gonna adjust his alpha value. It's currently 255, so he is 100% visible. I'm gonna crank that down to 0, and instantly the particle system looks like way better. Now I got to get rid of these like pesky, particles that are just popping out of existence. And so we can do that by simply adjusting the. You don't have an alpha. Did you click the top one? Because if you click on the bottom ones, you'll have a color. The top ones control alpha. So if you click on the top right one, you can also adjust its alpha and crank that down to 0 as well. But if you crank that one down to 0, well, now there's no visibility whatsoever. You can add your own markers by simply clicking somewhere in between the two. Not doing anything. Can you show me, Evelyn? Wait, show me what you did again? Yeah, you're not actually supposed to move those things. Huh? Yeah, just go ahead and click on the top left one, and then set its alpha to 0. And then click on the top right one, and then do the same, and that'll break it. And so now we're going to fix it. Boom. All right. Let me bring up my gradient editor. So if you click in between those two, like roughly in the middle here, and don't worry about being exact, you can always adjust the location manually. So I'm going to set it to like 50%. And here I'm going to adjust the alpha. And basically I'm going to keep this kind of low. So it's like 50 or something. And so what this is going to do is at the start of the particle's life, they're going to be invisible. Then at the 50% mark, so halfway through their existence, they're going to become, they're going to have an alpha value of 50. And then immediately after they hit that peak, they're then going to proceed to blend into complete transparency as they approach the end of their life. So we get that much nicer, much smoother look. How did I break the right one? Oh, I meant like when you, like by breaking it, I didn't actually mean like it's broken. It's just that if you don't add this middle one, right? So if you have this dude set to 100%, and then if you take it and crank it down to 0, since there's nothing in the middle, it's not going to have any visibility. So that's why you have to go and introduce that middle marker so that it has something to fade up to and then fade down from. Now we can fiddle around with some color stuff too. So if we select the lower left color picker thing, you can go ahead and just select the normal color picker. And here we can go ahead and adjust the color so that it does something that remotely matches our effect. So there I set it up so that it is just kind of like a blue. And yeah, currently they're fading out to white. If I wanted them to fade out to something else, I can just adjust that other color picker. So entirely up to you. And then I just kind of, jump back and forth from here. Like maybe from this point, I'm like, you know what? I don't think there's enough particles. Let me spawn like twice as many. So here's like 200. And then I can decide if that's like too many. Or maybe I don't like that all these particles are spawning like from the outside of that cylinder. So maybe what I want to do is take the radius of the shape and then kind of like, tuck that in a bit. And then maybe I sort of feel like, hey, all right, that kind of looks cool. But I'm like, hey, like, it still looks kind of weird because now like the particles aren't living long enough. So then I can go and adjust the starting lifetime so that they do last like longer. But then maybe I feel like that central glow is just too much. So I can come back into the color picker. And, like, if you're trying to follow along with me at this point, like, don't. Because what I'm trying to like show is that this is really where it gets much more of like, you know, and it becomes much more of an artistic thing where you're trying to establish what sort of changes you need to make in order to pull off the kind of look that you're going for, the kind of effect that you're going for. So it's much more about modifying, fiddling with options, just making something that, you know, looks interesting. And maybe I feel like, you know, at this point I'm kind of thinking maybe the size of these is a little bit too small. So, you know, I can just kind of exaggerate it. That looks like it's way too big. You know, 1 is obviously a little bit too small. Like try like 6 or 7. You know, just mess around with it. And keep in mind that we actually haven't done any texture work. It's still using like that default value. All we're worrying about right now is like shape. So don't let your eyes focus on the finer details. Like just try to get the shape right? So if we have this column of this like snowy whatever that's like coming down, like what do we expect to happen when it touches down? Or if it's kind of coming up from the ground, then, you know, sort of what do we expect there? And this is where you have to start to make a lot of decisions, right? Like here, the way that I have this, at least on mine, the way that it's swirling, the way that mine is like swirling downward like that, kind of sends a message about the origin of the energy that's coming from this, right? So it's like it's coming from the clouds or from the sky, and it's kind of spinning downward. And maybe that's not the kind of an effect that you're going for. Maybe you want it to look like all of this is sort of emanating from the ground, and you're trying to, instead of having downwards motion, you want to introduce upwards directionality. And this is where you can start to make a lot of those sorts of decisions if you haven't already. So if I wanted my stream to kind of start to flow upward, I can go back over to my material, and then what I can do is I can take my speeds and then make them like negative. So I'll change this speed to negative, this speed to negative, and this speed. All the speeds are now set to negative. And you can see that now it's floating, it's spiraling upwards. And maybe you like that better. And maybe you're like thinking to yourself, that's really slow. Like, it's too slow. It doesn't look like, it almost looks tranquil, like you want to walk into that. You want to be a part of whatever's going on in there. Which means it's sending the wrong message, right? We want this to be maybe a violent storm. So why not take and like these like speeds and just kind of like maybe go nuts with them in the negative direction. So see, like now as I start to take these speeds, grab these sliders, careful, don't mess with scale too much. Make sure, you know. Here I'll go and take this speed, crank it down. I'll take this speed and make it like, you know, -10. And now if I go, you'll see that like I've got what looks much more like it's emanating from the ground and is going up into the sky, and it's starting to look much more violent because of the speed. The directionality is saying a lot more about the relationship between it and the ground. Where's the origin of the energy, all of that stuff. And these are one of the things that I love about this process, is just how iterative it can be. There's all sorts of opportunities for you to make decisions, and a lot of those opportunities don't come up until you start combining these ideas together, right? And so I wasn't actually too sure on the directionality of, you know, where I wanted for this like tornado like to be going, but once I started to get this ground bit in here, I thought it maybe looked kind of strange that everything seemed to be flowing downwards. So I just went and made that change. And now a question that I'm having is, well, does it make sense for all of these like smoke whatevers that we're creating to just kind of flow outwards like that? Does that look great? And kind of like right now, I'm not sure that it does. I kind of want to play with this upwards motion some more. So if we go back into our particle system, What if we were to introduce some upwards force? So if you look above color over lifetime, there's this thing called force over lifetime. Let's go ahead and check that. And if you start fiddling with some of these like values, you'll see that you can start pushing particles around. If you start to push particles, like here, like I've got like negative z, so they're going downwards. Here, if I change this to like 10 or something like that, now I'm launching like particles up into the sky, which is looking kind of cool. And I hope that by now you're not really following along, right? You're just kind of fiddling around with these settings, trying to achieve something that looks cool. Because whenever I build this stuff, I'm constantly jumping up and down, figuring out what it is that I want. Like right now, you see how I almost have this sort of like a V shape. I almost have like kind of like a cone that's like happening. And maybe I don't want that. Like maybe what I want to do is go back to shape, change the radius so that the radius more or less matches like the shape of this like twister here. And then maybe what I want to stop doing is providing any sort of starting speed. Currently the start speed is 5. Let me change that to 0. And you see what happens there. Whenever I set it to 0, and I set the circle so that its shape is more or less the same radius as my twister is, then I get something that looks kind of interesting, kind of cool. And now kind of look at what you know we sort of achieved here. If I disable this, look at how much this twister kind of sucks on its own. It is obviously a cylinder. Granted, it's doing some cool stuff, but when you look at it, what you focus on is the cylinder, those hard edges, right? But look at what this particle system does for us now. Introduction to this particle system takes and breaks up the silhouette just enough, adds enough interesting upwards directionality. It breaks up that silhouette just enough so that we stop focusing on the shape being a primitive, and we start thinking about, hey, like this looks like it's some sort of freezing, damaging ability. And all it really took was the introduction of this particle system. We went from something that, you know, in your mind looks like a primitive shape to something that looks like it could be an ability in a game. And granted, it doesn't look like an ability that belongs in a game yet, but we're getting really close really fast. Kinda, yeah. So to recap what I did with this, all I did was, I did a lot of stuff. No, there's no joke about it. Like no question about it. But if what I ended up with after all of my experimentation is a particle system that has particles that live a very short lifetime, particles that start with no speed, because I want to control their speed down here with some force. I'm emitting 200 particles a second just because I felt like that's good. I could play with this number, like, crank it up to 500 and see if I like that more or less. That looks kind of interesting, kind of dope. It almost looks like it's maybe like too over the top. I'm going to take that back down to, maybe I'll compromise at 250. Next, shape. The radius, I made it the same, essentially the same as the twister itself. Now, by the way, for those of you guys who have a much wider base, for instance, like if the base of your tornado looks more like a volcano, right? If you've got that sort of a setup going on, then what you might have is a problem that looks sort of like this, where you've got your starting speed, something like this, where you basically have the particle system and the lines of where the actual particles are moving upwards don't line up. And so with that, you can experiment with taking this number and making it taking it to the negative direction, like -1. That will cause these particles to actually start to come inward. Try to make this -5. That takes them way too far, but you can actually see what I've done is actually kind of cool. I almost have this candle sort of a thing, because they're all kind of converging in the center, and then they're actually going a little bit too far. That's in the particle system right here where it says starting speed. So you might want to just make yours -1, -5, negative something. It's hard for me to say. But what you're probably going for is you want the radius of your circle to go just a little bit outside of the bounds of the twister itself, just to break up that silhouette. That's been our goal all along. And then you want just a little bit, you want to get these particles to kind of as close to as possible conform to the shape within reason. And so for that, I'm going to, for mine's in this case much more gradual, so I'll try -1. Even that might be too much, maybe -0.5. Yeah, I think that's better. So it's conforming inwards, but it isn't doing it in a crazy way. Maybe crank up the starting lifetime to 2. I think it was better before. I don't really have a science for how I go about, once I get to this point, there's no science. It's just feel, right? You just kind of mess with stuff. And then, I kind of feel it's a lot of the same processes as sculpting, where you want to get a good overall feel and make sure that the shapes are kind of working together before you focus on details. Because you never know what's going to inform, what's going to inform the decisions that you're making, and you want to give yourself the opportunity to have these happy accidents where you can find something that's really cool and head in that direction and feel good about it. And right now I have to ask the question, do we even want to add textures to this, or does that default kind of nice softness work? And I don't exactly know the answer just yet, but it's easy to explore. All right, do this for me, Evelyn. So go up to the top where it says particle system, and you see where it says starting speed. Change that to -5, and you should see very apparently. Where'd you go, particle system? Oh, I disabled you. You should see that those particles will go concave like super quick. No? Can you share screen with me? It's possible. Unity 5.6 released a ton of features for Unity's particle system. Like change it to like -100. I'm not even sure if this will work. But yeah, it could just be that like it's just a old and deprecated system. Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it. Yeah, just for next class, I'd recommend getting the newer version. Because yeah, they added so many things that are just like super awesome that are just missing in the older versions. Like doing VFX in Unity was like really hard up until pretty recently. I see you guys typing. I know you got something to say. Thanks, Ashley. I'm doing it. Don't worry, you didn't miss anything. I wasn't actually doing anything. Boom. Yeah, the Unity like Lite version, it doesn't actually skip out on like features and stuff. Yeah, like where the interface doesn't like look dark and stuff like this. But feature-wise, Unity it has all the same features, at least for the stuff that we're doing in class. Yeah, it's definitely an old version problem. All right. Let's try to add a couple of extra effects to this. So the next thing that we're going to do, let's take this particle system that we just created and let's duplicate it. And Evelyn, you're going to feel super bad because the thing that we're about to do is also most definitely a newer Unity thing. So the way that you can duplicate an object is by selecting it. So I'm going to select this particle system. By the way, we should start naming stuff. So like this particle system, I don't know what I'm going to call this. Like this is like outer fog. I have a lot of trouble naming my particle or naming my VFX game objects because some of them get really abstract. Like it's like snow debris, snow blast, snow flurry, and all that other sort of stuff. It sounds, I'll have 12 different kinds of embers and ashes, and it gets a little bit challenging. So this is the outer fog. I'm calling it outer fog, assuming maybe I'll add another kind of fog at some point. But to duplicate an object, simply select it, and then hold down Control and tap the D key. Now I got this new fog thing. And this is just experimental at this point. I'm just trying stuff, right? So I'm trying to get you guys like feeling like you can have fun with this and not get scared. I feel like, you know, when you're in Shader Forge, life can be a little bit scary because it feels like all you got to do is just do one thing slightly wrong and things explode. With particles, that's not really true. You can just screw around all day with these, just playing around, coming up with stuff. So I want you guys to, you know, feel good about exploring and just trying things out and feeling okay if things don't pan out. So with this, I'm just going to experiment with the shape. I'm going to go over here to shape, and I'm going to take the radius, I'm going to bring it in, and I'm going to extend the lifetime pretty dramatically. So let me make this like 3. The idea being that I want like to kind of create this sort of an effect where I'm like shooting stuff out of the top. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trying stuff. Maybe that's a little bit intense, maybe like 2.5. Yeah, something like that perhaps. I feel like the size is huge. So let me change the size down to like 1. Maybe like 0.1. Too small. 0.2, 0.3. 0.3 looks kind of good. And if you're saying to yourself, I can't see it, that's good. Because I don't exactly want you to see it very well. I want it to be really subtle. See this, like, all this little extra motion here? That's the pro stuff. All that nice secondary motion. Because anybody can pull off primary motion, right? The big shapes moving. But what really sells it is the secondary stuff. The tiny little particles, the extra dust and debris that we can be shooting off of here. Primary motion stuff is easy, but once you have your primary shapes and your primary movement in place, all your, you know, all the directionalities nice and working, then you need to complement it with some secondary activity. So let me modify this a little bit. I'm going to go and change the shape. In shape, I currently have radius thickness set to 0. That makes it emit everything at the edge. I'm going to change this to 1, which basically means anywhere in this volume, anywhere in this circle, it's going to emit stuff. We go and change the radius a little bit so I'm closer to touching some of the edges, and that's looking pretty great, I think. And it's super subtle. Some people might not notice it, but you guys, you know, I think you've been at this long enough to know that, like, a lot of times it's like people will look at a piece that you did and they won't notice the little things, but they'll know that overall the piece is great. And it was the little things that did it. And it's these, you know, tiny little dots like this, these really super small dots. They're adding that extra upwards motion, that they're complementing our upwards directionality. And it's super subtle. And one of the challenges that I constantly have is keeping it subtle, right? Because like right now I'm like, that looks dope. What I should do is I should, you know, go over here where its alpha is set to 20 and I should crank that up to like 255. I do this sort of thing all the time. Where I'm like, you know, you can't have too much of a good thing, right? And then I go and I just add a bunch of these dudes. And that's actually not good, right? Like, the thing that really sells this is that subtlety. So I would recommend that, you know, you, just like with sculpting, don't go insane on any one aspect of it, right? Like, work in layers. And always work on something until you're like, this looks good enough, and then I always recommend moving on to the next layer right after it. Like, this is already doing the things that I want it to do. So don't push it. Don't dial it up to 11. Keep it at like a 6, because as you, I think I showed you with that Kel'Thuzad ability, like that ability has like 20, 30 layers, and if everything was dialed up to 11, like it would look gross. Everything needs to kind of, you know, have its own thing going on. So particle systems only simulate when they're selected. So if I select the second one, that'll move, but you'll notice that the stop one, the other one freezes. And if I select the twister, you'll see that all of them freeze. The particle systems only will be simulating while the game is off if you have them selected. But you can always just hit play, and that will show all of them working together. Is what I said true, or am I a liar? I have been known to be a liar. Okay, cool. I'm kind of thinking I want to try to modify this a little bit. Like maybe I want to take that top gradient and then kind of crunch it down like a lot, just so that I can have a feathering that kind of occurs more around like here. And I don't know if I actually want that. I'm just going to try it. Save, go back in, and I don't know if that did a whole lot for me, just like by looking at it right now. We go back into Photoshop. Undo that, but maybe what I want to do is I want to have a stronger taper towards the top, so I can just kind of go and duplicate that top gradient just to make so it's darker. Save that, go back. I think that's more of what I'm going for, like maybe like a stronger taper. I think I'm kind of liking that. Just move my camera up a little bit. Now let's try something maybe a little bit funny. You guys may not think that this is necessary, and I'm not sure that I do either. But this outer fog, I want to see what happens if we try to apply a noise texture to it. It's going to get ugly real fast. I'm going to see if we can reuse the texture that we wrote, or the shader that we wrote to pull this off. So I'm going to see if that shader is going to be capable of working instead of this default material that we're using for our particles. So I'm going to go ahead and select that outer fog. That's the soft outer fog. Let me create a new material, which I will call outer fog. This may go horribly wrong, but it's quick to try stuff out, so what's the point in not doing that? Alright, so here's our outer fog. I'm going to change the shader to Shader Forge, Vortex. This is going to look super ugly, I know it. And let's go ahead and let me go and find our outer fog again. If you select your outer fog, scroll all the way down to the last segment, which is a renderer, and click. You'll see here that it's using this default particle material. If you want to change what your particles look like, that's the material that you need to replace. So this outer fog I just created, let me drag and drop that in. And whoa. That looks kind of insane. Definitely is a thing. Definitely a thing. let me chill this the hell out. So go to color on our outer fog material. Let's get this thing to chill. So I'm gonna make it more transparent. Make it more like, I don't know, like blue. I know what you're thinking. I know you think this looks terrible. The question is, can we salvage this? The answer is maybe not. But I want to try. And if you don't want to come with me on this journey, that's cool. So here's what I think the problem is. If I go to my outer fog, I think the problem is this mask. Like, let me go ahead and remove this mask. Like, I just, where it says select, let me just go and hit none. So do you see, let me modify this particle system a little bit so it's not emitting so many particles. 10. Do you see what's actually emitting? It's spitting out squares of our shader. And if you look, you can actually see that these squares that it's spitting out, it has the moving cloud stuff happening. And I'm predicting that the reason why it looks so bad is that since by default I kind of had that mask assigned there, that mask doesn't make sense for particles. Because particles, if you summon up a bunch of particles that are all square like that, it's going to look weird, right? Particles usually look good when they have like some kind of like a circular shape. So, what if we were to hop into Photoshop, and what if we were to generate a new mask? Let me do that. So we'll go new. Let's do 1024 by 1024. Resolution doesn't really matter. Create. I'm gonna fill. No, I don't need to fill. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna switch this over to like a radial gradient. And oops, wrong way. Flip my colors around. So I'm gonna roughly click on the center, and then I'm not gonna go all the way. I'm only gonna go like maybe like, from the center half of the way. So I get a nice gradient that looks like this. So black on the outsides, and then whiter as it approaches the center. And I'm gonna use this as a mask instead of that double linear gradient thing. So I'll save this. I'll share this with you guys. So this is my radial gradient called VFX radial gradient. Cool. Minimize. Let me share this with the fan. So now I want to try this. So here's my outer fog material. I'm going to replace this mask with this new mask that I just created. So drag and drop that mask to replace the old mask. Let's see if this looks any better. It's a little bit dim. So let me go and adjust that. There's outer fog. Let me tweak the color of it. Now, interesting effect. Probably not one that that we can get looking great, at least not soon. I mean, I can see here that I can go and do things like modify like the size of it and get the smoke to look much wispier. This would actually be a stellar implementation, except for the fact that you may notice that these particles seem to be popping in and then not fading out over time. In other words, they seem to be entirely ignoring our color over lifetime. And the reason for that is that Unity's built-in particle system doesn't support modifying the color of objects that are from custom shaders, which basically doesn't mean that this is a bad approach that we can't use it. It just means that we would need to build our own functionality to fade these particles out over time. And that's okay, right? Like, a failed experiment is, it's a failed experiment. Worst case scenario, I just got to go back and then change this over back to the default particle. So like right here where I set this to outer fog, I'm just going to change that back to default particle. Change this back to 200. And then change the size back to, I think, at like 5 or something like that. And we're back. Experimentation, nice, quick, easy, simple. I didn't duplicate the vortex shader. The outer fog uses just the default material. It just uses like a default material, and same thing with the inner one. So neither one of those end up using the vortex material. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do today is we're going to add in some more mesh work to go ahead and further make this ability look good. And so what we're going to do is we're going to actually go back into the same file that you're using for your twister, for your twisting mesh, because we're going to be building these additional meshes or this other stuff based off of this. Okay, so once you're in your modeling app, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and find, in my case, I'm basically just going to be trying to grab 2 edge loops worth, or like 2 edge rings worth of geometry. And I'm planning on separating that from everything else. So what I'm trying to do is this. I'm trying to grab a section that looks like this. So what I want to do is take this section and I want to isolate it from the rest, so that I can delete all of those faces. So I'm just left with this nice spirally ribbon that's going to conform perfectly to the shape or the body of the initial twister. And after I do that, what I'm going to do is just, it should already be unwrapped, but what I'm going to do is, since I have all this extra space now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this and stretch this out so that it encompasses more or less the entirety of the space. Now, we definitely don't have to be perfect with filling in this space. Don't feel like you have to use any snapping tools or anything like that to get it perfectly fit. Just because we're going to be creating a mask that's going to not only block off the top and the bottom for smoothness sake, but also the left and the right. So we don't even need to use a tiling texture for this. We might as well take advantage of all of this UV real estate. Why not? I'm going to go ahead and save this mesh. Does anybody want a copy of it, or are you good? I'm going to call this twist ribbon. You got it. Here's my twist ribbon file. Go ahead and drag that guy in here. And scale it up to something appropriate. I don't care too much about scale, I'm just kind of eyeballing it. I'm trying to get it to kind of more or less conform to the the shape of the tornado itself. But it definitely doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, it's the whole point is for it to not be exactly perfect. And the reason why I don't want it to be exactly perfect is that if it's actually fitting perfectly, if it's completely conforming to the shape of the tornado, then it's not going to serve the purpose of actually breaking up the silhouette of the tornado. The whole reason why I want to have this around is so that it will actually disrupt this nice, clean, cylindrical profile even more than we already have. So just kind of loosely placing this. being precise doesn't matter very much at all. What I'm gonna end up doing though is duplicating this guy, and then I'm gonna be rotating it around several times, just so that I can kind of create almost like a blender. What's gonna look like just kind of like a spinning blade. And so I'm just going to kind of lay out these shapes so it's going to make it more or less easy for me to do that. So I'm going to create my first duplication and then move it across. And then take this guy and rotate him 90 degrees, no, 180. You definitely don't need to be perfect with this by any means. Duplicate again, rotate 90 degrees, and then roughly place it. It's actually a really good idea to not be exact with this, because the less exact you are, the more you're going to succeed in kind of breaking up the shape like we're intending. And let's go ahead and create another one of these. This is going to be a rotation by 270 degrees. Just going to fiddle with the scale of these. Just keep on trying to place them. I'm not really going for anything in particular, just more or less trying to come up with something that I just think is just kind of pleasing, kind of interesting. Again, not really getting all committed to anything just yet. And then as we are starting to get a little bit closer, what I'm going to do is just very lazy, just drag and drop your vortex material onto these dudes. You can kind of see what's already happening. But the sole reason that they're there is they're just going to add some additional lines that are going to be kind of counteracting, moving in a different direction. And we don't exactly know where we're going just yet. We're just still sort of experimenting. So commitment at this stage is super low. We're just kind of trying stuff out, seeing if it works. But you can already sort of see in the scene view here how these spirals, how since they kind of jut out and away from that central column like this, how they're going to succeed in kind of once again breaking up all those hard lines. Now here it's a little too exaggerated. The opacity level or the visibility of these dudes is it's way too strong. We need to tone that down substantially. Also, it's really jarring how, from bottom to top, they have that nice smooth fade like we have set up with our vortex that works really good. But over here on the right and the left and right sides, the horizontal, we get that really sharp, steep cutoff. And also our texture scaling is all gross. So these are all things that we're going to want to fix, to improve upon. But overall, I think that the direction that it's heading in is good. And this is we're not going to do this now. I think we're heading into everybody's head exploding kind of territory. But here's what we're going to be doing in just a second here. Next time. So all these ribbons that I just created, what we're going to do, is at the center of all of them, we're going to create I'm just going to make a cube, just because it's nice and visual. This cube is going to be the parent object for all of these little spinning ribbons. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take that cube and we're going to animate him so that he constantly rotates. And it's going to create this sort of an effect. So if we can improve upon the way that these ribbons look, which I'm confident we can, we just need to make a new material with some slight modifications to it and that sort of thing. So if we can improve upon that and we can get this nice spirally motion, this like spin happening, I think we'll be able to pull off a pretty decent looking effect. That's our goal, but we're not going to do that this time. We'll be tackling all that stuff next time. So let me just hit the Control-Z button several times so that the next time we start, we'll be at this point. I want to take a moment to ask if there are any questions that you guys have about any of the stuff that we covered today. Yeah, that's super lazy. Didn't next time we get together, we'll actually be putting together a custom material for them that will still use the Vortex shader. But yeah, I played it lazy this time. Vertex painting. So the reason why you would want to do vertex painting is because you want to make it so that plants procedurally grow and do that sort of thing. We might, Eugene. I wasn't planning on it, but we might. Because the shader code for it is not for the faint of heart. so we might not. Can I redo whatever I did with the second outer fog with the circle gradient? Explain, Ashley. What you talking about? Ashley, don't you have a microphone? Yes. Well, then why do you have a microphone? The problem is that if you were to apply that material to that center group, is that you would still have you'd have a couple of issues. One, the first issue is that you would have all this extra detail, but those little tiny particles are so small that they're like almost impossible to see. So you wouldn't actually really get all the value out of that detail, and also they wouldn't do the fade in fade out thing. Oh man, does Eric? Are you you're familiar with Ashley then? Yeah, you know how she rolls. An example of what not to do. It was more of an example of let's just try stuff, right? And I want you guys to get to the point where you feel like, hey, particle systems are actually kind of easy. It's just a matter of screwing around with a bunch of settings. And so you'll never get anywhere with particles if you're apprehensive and you don't you don't feel safe diving in there and exploring and just modifying values and stuff. And so yeah, that was kind of like me taking you on a journey where it's like, ooh, I wonder if we can try this. But even though it's a total failure, like it's just a couple of control Z's away, or reverting back to a different material, or whatever. So it was kind of like more of like a mindset kind of a thing. Because yeah, it was a failure of an experiment, but it gave us a better understanding of what we have available to us, and things like that. I didn't use the circle gradient. The fog, you should probably name me something better, like inner stuff. I don't know. The inner stuff just uses that same default, so no mask. This like thing that looks like a mask isn't a mask. That's just built into the default particle shader, or default particle material. My bad. Your particles start and stop. Well, so your particles will only run in when your game isn't on if you select them. So here I have the inner stuff, which is moving, but you see that the outer has stopped moving, and here I clicked on outer, and now it's moving. I didn't. Oh, I didn't. I made a new material, but we can get rid of that because failed experiment. Yeah, don't feel like you're gonna break Unity, or like you're gonna do something horribly wrong. Like shaders are a lot easier to get wrong than particle systems. Worst case scenario, just delete your particle system and rebuild it. Like worst case scenario. But I want you guys to go the motions of just feel comfortable, experiment, explore. Kim, was that it? Are you just not like selecting them? So like, because that means everything for whether or not they're going to be moving, starting and stopping. Okay, well, you want a screen share so I can see what's going on? Okay, so click on your particle system. So let's see. Looping. Your particles live a long time. And so here's the problem. This if you really want to know the problem, you're generating 250 particles. Do you see inside of emission where it says rate over time? So you're generating 250 particles a second. Your duration of your particles, your start lifetime, is 5 seconds, right? So that means that over the course of 5 seconds, you'll have 1,250 particles on the screen. Now look at the bottom of particle system where it says max particles is set to 1,000. So that means that at some time you are going to hit an overload of particles. So if you change that to 1,250, you should have the perfect allotment to keep that flame constantly going. And if you didn't want to do math and stuff, then that's cool. You could just fiddle with those numbers and just increase the maximum number of particles. But does it make sense why I was doing that? Cool. Later, Evelyn. Sorry. Oh, damn, she mad at me. Any other questions? Alright, cool guys. I'll get this video uploaded, and I will see you guys next time where we will finish up this ability, and then we'll move on to the next thing. You guys take it easy. I will see you all later. Laters, bye. See ya. Totally, my pleasure. Sure thing, Christina. Bye.